We will now call upon our final senior for the final thesis presentation of the 25-26 school year. I had a comment, I'm going to keep it to myself because the last thing I need is you up here laughing before you have to read. Can we please give a round of applause to Ms. Jemela? Ms. Jemela will be sharing the failure of CPS and the urgency of correcting it.
A young child hides in the darkest corner of a room, hands shaking, crying silently, not because of what they see, but because of what they do not see. No one there to help, no one there to protect, no one there to support. Just the haunting realization that the system designed to protect them will never come. This was the harsh reality of Gabriel Fernandez, an 8-year-old boy whose repeated cries for help were overlooked by those meant to protect him. Multiple reports to Child Protective Services were made regarding the abuse of Gabriel. Social workers documented concerns but failed to remove him from the dangerous environment, even as his injuries escalated. For about a decade, Gabriel Fernandez was reported to CPS at least 60 times, yet nothing was done further. In 2013, Gabriel died after enduring months of horrific abuse, a tragedy that sparked national outrage and scrutiny of the child welfare system. His case illustrates how the steps taken by those within the child welfare system greatly affect each individual child. This failure represents a deeper moral responsibility to defend vulnerable children. As Proverbs 31:8-9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." This verse emphasizes the obligation society has to protect endangered children and ensure that the system created for their safety fulfills that purpose. Child Protective Services, or CPS, was established to protect children from abuse, neglect, and dangerous living situations. Its origins trace back to the late 19th century, when growing awareness of child mistreatment led to the creation of child welfare organizations. These early efforts eventually led to greater government involvement in child protection. By the 20th century, growing public concern surrounding child abuse resulted in federal intervention. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, passed in the 1970s, became a major turning point because it provided funding and guidance for states to develop modern CPS agencies. From that point on, CPS became the primary system responsible for preventing harm and supporting vulnerable families. Over many years, the role of CPS grew beyond child protection alone. Caseworkers began dealing with situations such as poverty, substance abuse, mental health crises, domestic violence, and family instability. While this broader role was intended to improve family support, it also placed a great strain on an already overworked system. As responsibilities grew, so did the difficulties with managing their role across agencies. These issues made it more difficult to consistently ensure child safety. In recent years, serious concerns have arisen regarding the effectiveness of CPS. Reports of wrongful acts and overlooked abuse have raised questions about the agency's decision-making process. Additionally, many children within the foster care system have reported lack of emotional support, instability, and constant home removals. These issues reveal flaws within the agency, suggesting that CPS may not be adequately prepared to assess risk. Despite CPS existing for decades with the mission to protect, its ability to do so remains concerning. These issues point to deeper systemic problems, including overworked caseworkers, biased judgment, and lack of accountability. Ultimately, these issues reflect deeper problems within CPS. Society widely agrees on the importance of protecting children and valuing childhood as an important part of development. However, these problems are not isolated incidents, but repeated patterns that reflect structural weaknesses. CPS faces serious challenges that demand meaningful reform. Addressing these issues requires stronger accountability, better training, increased funding, and a clear focus on safety. Although CPS was created to protect children, recent trends show a decline in its effectiveness. In this context, failure is not just a lack of success, but a pattern of inadequate protection. These systemic failures highlight a growing gap between society's expectations to protect children and CPS's current performance. Therefore, this essay will prove that CPS declines the welfare of children due to underfunding, discrimination, and overreach. Failure within CPS is truly costing children their safety for many different reasons. One of the most serious concerns surrounding CPS is that some children remain in dangerous homes despite repeated reports of neglect and maltreatment. Research such as When the Village Fails documents multiple cases in which clear warning signs are present, but meaningful intervention did not occur. I already mentioned the widely known case of Gabriel Fernandez. But what about the many children who are in similar situations yet receive far less public recognition? The case of Sophia Mason is one such example. Sophia Mason, an 8-year-old girl from California, showed that she endured clear and ongoing signs of abuse. Quote, "It was discovered that Sophia had injuries on her entire body and not had attended school in several weeks." Despite direct confirmation from Sophia herself, who stated that her own mother had grabbed her neck when she was mad, covering her mouth. CPS failed to remove her despite the constant reports. Ultimately, the social workers failed to protect her, demonstrating how systemic failures in response and intervention can lead to tragic consequences. Scripture warns against neglecting justice for the vulnerable. Isaiah 1:17 says, Isaiah 1:17 commands believers to learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. When intervention plans fail, they violate this principle of continuous safety. CPS is failing to remove children in some cases, but in others, they often face additional issues in their placement homes. Foster care placement, while intended to protect children, can create additional trauma. The child welfare involvement and adjustment among care alumni shows that children who are removed from their homes often face long-term emotional, psychological, and behavioral challenges. They stated, care alumni are disproportionately burdened by homelessness, low educational achievement, poverty, unemployment, mental health problems, and substance use problems. Frequent placement changes, lack of stability, and separation from familiar environments can intensify feelings of abandonment and insecurity. This suggests that while removals may sometimes be necessary, the system often fails to provide consistent support and stability children need to thrive. Additionally, CPS involvement is often connected to broader negative outcomes. Research on child protective services and involvement in exclusionary school discipline and child development indicates that children who interact with the system are more likely to experience school discipline issues and long-term instability. This connection implies that CPS involvement, especially when misused, may add to this cycle of disruptive behavior. Instead of solely acting as a protective force, CPS can reinforce issues that follow children into adulthood. Another major factor contributing to CPS's decline is the overwhelming burden placed on caseworkers that causes exhaustion, which leads to rushed or inadequate investigations. Overworked staff within CPS often struggle to keep up with large number of caseloads that are assigned to them. Caseworkers are responsible for far more families than recommended, forcing them to divide attention across situations. As discussed in the Child Protective Services transformation, these caseloads have little room for follow-ups. As a result, investigations may be rushed or incomplete, putting children at a much greater risk. When caseworkers are stretched past their limits, the system shifts from proactive to reactive. Burnout within the agency is also a serious concern. The emotional toll of continuous traumatic situations, long hours, and a high-pressure environment leads to exhaustion. Evidence from the professional development evaluation highlights the need for stronger support. When caseworkers are burned out, their ability to assess risk and make sound judgment is compromised. Mistakes increase, and even small errors can have devastating consequences in child welfare cases. Limited funding further magnifies these issues. Without sufficient financial resources, agencies struggle to hire staff, provide training, and offer other services to struggling families. This creates a cycle. Underfunding leads to burnout, which leads to weaker decisions, which leads to more failures. Additionally, prevention programs like mental health services become limited, leaving families without support. Concerns have also been raised about accountability within CPS agencies. Research such as documentation of family services shows families often feel dismissed or ignored. This suggests that agencies may prioritize protecting themselves from criticism over fixing their own mistakes. Lack of accountability allows failures to repeat. This is evident in the case of A.J. Pruitt, a 5-year-old boy who died in 2019 after severe abuse. Warning signs were documented, but intervention failed. He told a social worker, quote, "Maybe someone hit me with a belt. Maybe mommy didn't mean to hurt me." Despite this, proactive action was not taken. After remaining in the unsafe home, AJ was forced to take a cold shower, as a punishment for soiling himself. This was the leading factor of his death. His death highlights missed opportunities and systemic failure. Systemic bias is another critical issue. Data shows minority families are disproportionately involved in CPS cases, raising concerns about bias in reporting and investigations. This weakens trust in the system and raises questions about fairness. Finally, CPS expansion beyond child protection into broader social services has weakened its effectiveness. As discussed in Beyond Child Abuse, CPS is often expected to address issues like poverty and family services without the resources to do so effectively. As the article states, quote, "The belief that CPS can fully support all family crises is not supported by evidence. At first glance, national data suggests improvement in child abuse rates. For example, 546,196 children were identified as victims, a 19.3% decrease from 2019. However, this does not necessarily mean real improvement. Changes in reporting standards and investigation procedures may explain this decline. This raises a key question. Are fewer children being harmed, or are fewer being counted? Some argue CPS is improving through prevention programs and reform efforts. While these exist, implementation varies by state, creating unequal protection. In 2024 alone, agencies received 4.365 million referrals, yet screened in only 47.1% of them. This inconsistency shows uneven reform and unequal outcomes. Supporters argue CPS saves thousands of children each year, and that is true. However, in 2023 alone, about 2,000 children died from abuse and neglect, in the United States. This shows that severe failure still occurs. A system can succeed in some cases while still failing in many others. True protection requires consistency, not partial success. Child Protective Services was created with one clear purpose: to protect children from abuse, neglect, and dangerous conditions. Yet systemic indifference, bias, underfunding, and caseworker burnout have weakened its ability to fulfill that mission. Children like Gabriel Fernandez, Sophia Mason, Adrian Floyd, Anthony Avalos, Owen Rosario, Mercedes Losoya, and Ethan Belcher stand as reminders of what happens when the system fails to act. These are not isolated tragedies. They reflect a larger pattern of systemic failure. Rebuilding CPS requires more than minor reform. It requires accountability, funding, training, and a system that prioritizes child safety above everything else. Every child deserves protection that is fast, fair, and consistent. As James 1:27 states, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. A society is judged by how it protects its most vulnerable. And when systems fail to do that, reform is not optional. It is urgent. Thank you.
My cheeks hurt because I'm smiling so much at you. You killed it. Great job, Miss Jemela. Great job. Time. We are at the time because we started 15 minutes after we were supposed to start. So we're holding you young folk hostage so that the panelists can at least get one round of questions, okay? And then I'll wrap this up. So go for it. We just got time for one question per.
Thank you. Another hugely important pro-life topic, and you tackled a really big one that is politically a bit of a mess. So I've been on the board of our county's Children, Youth, and Family, so I know exactly what you're describing. Back in 2015, Jerry Sandusky, who was a coach at Penn State, was charged with molesting boys. During that time, it caused a flurry of new laws to come into place in Pennsylvania. So reporting numbers skyrocketed. Okay, so they really shot up, which has created an interesting problem. So only about 11% of cases that are actually reported are substantiated. So I think it's somewhere like 4,000 cases of the 40,000 cases that are reported. And so clearly, you highlighted that CPS is overwhelmed, overburdened. I'm curious to know, you talked about funding. What specifically does that look like? More money, everybody wants more money. Is that more money for more caseworkers? What's the financial solution to this problem?
Money is needed to support not only the staff because they are faced with such heavier caseloads, but also to provide the resources, the services, and just to help the families that need it the most so that they can get what they need.
Jemela, you did your thing. You did a very, very good job. Very good job. Very passionate, very compelling. Your poetry loud skills were very vibrant up there. But I really enjoyed you. So as a mandated reporter, everything I thought you had some great points, as far as the decline in the welfare system and pointing it back to defunding and discrimination and the exhaustion of the overwhelming burden of the workers. But I want to talk about, how we could maybe possibly eliminate that exhaustion. So as a mandated reporter working at the Women's Care Center, we noticed that there were a lot of cases that were misleading, cases that were called that were not true. And you actually brought this up in your paper. You do acknowledge that wrongful removals have raised serious concerns, but you framed that as a failure of a CPS judgment rather than considering whether false or bad reporting might be a contributing factor. So my question to you is, during your research, have you found that maybe the contribution of false claims, is that contributing to the overwhelming burden that a lot of these CPS workers are experiencing? And also, did you find that we have the proper consequences set in place for people who do file claims that are not true in order to eliminate the amount of false claims that exist?
I would say that a lot of cases are reported that are inadequate, and it does contribute to the burnout because the social workers have to go and evaluate each case that is reported. Although it may not be done properly, it still takes the time out of every other case to make sure they are evaluating and just assessing whether the child is really at abuse or in abuse and the treatment that they are facing in their home. But I did not discover any consequences that someone may face when they falsely report.
Good job, thank you.
Thank you so much. Great job on an important topic. So, in his book, Mr. Anderson, for whom I just have to say I have nothing but the highest respect and appreciation for, said, what in your local community breaks your heart, and how can you get other people to see it the way you do? So, you brought us a clear case of things that should break the hearts of every American. But you also said that although society broadly agrees on the importance of protecting children, we're not doing it. Your research shows that we're failing to do so. So what do you think keeps us as a society from doing what we believe is truly important to protect children?
I would say feeling like it's not your responsibility and believing that there's other people who are going to see it and step up. Strongly can impact someone else's decision, but truly everyone is the voice. They should speak up. They should be the light for those who can't speak for themselves. In this case, that would be the vulnerable children who are being harmed. They can't properly advocate for themselves. So I feel like everyone should speak up despite what they think might come at them.
Mr. Jemela,